Gentlemen, maybe we can start. I've just been informed that the minister is on his way. He should be here momentarily. So I will, since we have little time and we want to make the best use of time, I would like to just give you a very warm welcome. This meeting, this side event will be held in English. And the minister will address you in Portuguese, and you will be able to hear interpretation into English on channel 3. So if you do not have your little machines, you might want to grab one at the back of the room. So a very warm welcome on behalf of the Brazilian delegation and of CIRED to this very important meeting. We have a number of other partners here, which I will now briefly announce. This is a discussion on positive carbon pricing and the potential of paragraph 108 of the Paris Agreement and finance strategies for NDC implementation. Just so that, we have the minister who is arriving, so.
I need the person that deals here with this computer, please.
So somebody,
it's not working.
Somebody from the technical staff to support us. We have Minister Sarney Filho in the room. So
again, someone from the technical support is needed here now.
Okay, so continuing with the introductions, a very warm welcome to Minister Sarney Filho, who has just joined us. Just to inform you that I am not National Secretary Everton Lucero. Although he is in the program, Secretary Lucero is in the room. He has asked me. He's a little bit has a sore throat, so he asked me to help him, which I'm very honored to do. To recognize here in the room a number Congressman Evandro Gussi, Senator Fernando Bezerra, and there are many other members of the delegation. The chief negotiator on climate change, Ambassador Marcondes de Carvalho, is in the room, and of course National Secretary Lucero. On the podium we have of course Minister Sarney Filho, Minister of the Environment of Brazil. We have Marina Grossi, President of CIRED. I'll try to translate that. Environmental Council, Brazilian Environmental Council on Sustainable Development. We have Gustavo Manes Gomes from UN Environment, Regional Climate Change Coordinator. We have Maria Mendiluce, Managing Director of National Capital on the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. We have Mr. Sean Kidney, CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative. We have Monsieur Vincent Ossillou, Director of the Economic Department of the France Stratégie, the Office of the French Prime Minister for discussion on general challenges, global challenges. And of course, we have as the moderator of this important panel, Mr. Alfredo Sirquis, who is the chairman of the Brazilian Forum on Climate Change, recently appointed to take charge of that important forum of discussion on climate change issues, which gathers people from government, parliament, different business and civil society. So very briefly, I don't want to take any more time. I would like to offer the floor to His Excellency Minister Sarney Filho, who will address you on the issue that is under discussion. Following his address, we will then proceed to a discussion as I mentioned, that is going to be moderated by Secretary Sirkis. So without further ado, I offer the floor to Minister Sarney Filho for his address.
Eu falo daqui mesmo? Se você quiser falar. Eu falo daqui. Boa tarde. Agradeço a todos pela presença e participação nesse evento sobre precificação positiva do carbono. Cumprimento a senhora Marina Grossi, o Alfredo Sirkis, a todos os membros da mesa. Gostaria de registrar que nós damos grande importância, temos grande interesse no engajamento dessa discussão. O Acordo de Paris abre uma nova agenda de oportunidades para negócios sustentáveis no Brasil, que vão apoiar a retomada do desenvolvimento econômico de forma competitiva e sustentável. Encaramos o desafio climático como uma grande oportunidade para reorientarmos o Projeto Nacional de Desenvolvimento rumo à criação de uma economia de baixo carbono. Em Paris, pela primeira vez, uma COP de clima fez um reconhecimento político do valor social, econômico e ambiental das ações voluntárias de mitigação, assim como seus co-benefícios para a adaptação à saúde e o desenvolvimento sustentável. A partir dessa diretriz política, de iniciativa do Brasil e aceita por todos, está aberto o caminho para pensarmos as ferramentas financeiras adequadas que possam premiar quem se esforça para implementar o Acordo de Paris e, assim, atrair cada vez mais agentes econômicos para atividades de baixa emissões. O Brasil, como todos sabem, é um país continente. Já sofremos fortes impactos da mudança do clima, seja pelo aumento das cheias no norte, seja nas secas cada vez mais extensas e extremadas no Nordeste. Nossos rios sofrem o impacto da falta de chuva, nossas matas estão mais vulneráveis a queimadas, o que coloca em risco um imenso volume de carbono estocado nas florestas, sem falar na perda de recursos da maior biodiversidade do planeta e nos riscos para a produção de alimentos. Conscientes desse problema, assumimos metas ambiciosas sobre o Acordo de Paris. Até agora, somos o único país, grande país em desenvolvimento, com metas absolutas de redução de emissões para o conjunto da economia. 37% até 2025 e 43% até 2030. Vamos atingir e, se possível, superar essa meta, sem abrir mão da geração de empregos, do aumento da produtividade e da retomada do crescimento econômico. As áreas prioritárias para a nossa ação são agropecuária sustentável, energias renováveis e combate ao desmatamento. Em cada setor, teremos ações específicas que abrem novas oportunidades de negócio e de investimentos de longo prazo, em linha com o objetivo traçado em Paris. Nosso projeto de desenvolvimento é um projeto de Estado, que encontra absoluto respaldo em toda a sociedade. Temos reiterado nosso compromisso em adotar políticas e ações em todos os níveis, federal, estadual e municipal, para cumprir a Agenda 2030 e os Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável da ONU. A erradicação da miséria e a geração de melhor qualidade de vida e oportunidades de trabalho e realização para nosso povo permanecem nossa prioridade absoluta. Infelizmente, ainda há quem afirme que as medidas necessárias para reduzir as emissões podem afetar o crescimento econômico. quero atuar firmemente para mudar essa percepção. Nenhum assunto da atualidade requer maior transversalidade e coerência entre as políticas econômicas, sociais e ambientais do que a mudança do clima. Sabemos que a inação em relação à mudança do clima terá efeito muito pior sobre a economia, pois tornará muito mais difícil a redução da pobreza e da desigualdade, com efeitos nocivos sobre a oferta de água e de energia, sobre a produção agrícola e a segurança alimentar, sobre a saúde de nossas populações, sobre a segurança e a infraestrutura das nossas cidades. Nosso grande desafio para implementar as metas da NDC é o financiamento. Não condicionamos o cumprimento de nossas metas ao apoio internacional, mas estamos abertos à cooperação para mobilizar os recursos necessários de todas as fontes, bilaterais e multilaterais, públicas e privadas. Anima-nos o fato de que o Acordo de Paris trouxe uma grande inovação sobre financiamento. Fixou entre seus objetivos mais gerais o de tornar os fluxos financeiros consistentes com uma trajetória de baixas emissões e de desenvolvimento resiliente à mudança do clima. Como fazer isso? Essa é a pergunta que eu faço aos especialistas que aqui se reúnem. Precisamos de ideias criativas e inovadoras para mobilizar recursos que apoiem nossas ações nacionais. Não temos ilusão quanto à transferência líquida de recursos dos países industriais. Os prometidos 100 bilhões de dólares anuais em 2020 não chegarão nem perto do volume de recursos que precisaremos mobilizar para o combate efetivo à mudança do clima e para a adaptação aos seus efeitos. A ajuda oficial ao desenvolvimento tampouco está apta a financiar as ações necessárias nos países em desenvolvimento. O financiamento público é importante, mas não será suficiente. Precisamos criar instrumentos financeiros inovadores, voltados para negócios sustentáveis, que mobilizem os recursos necessários. Por exemplo, reconhecendo o próprio resultado de redução de emissões como valor para lastrear novos investimentos em projetos de baixo carbono, ou prover garantias que reduzam o risco desses investimentos no longo prazo. O preço do carbono viria como uma imposição que gera ônus às atividades produtivas. É assim que entendemos a precificação positiva. Nosso objetivo é motivar uma ampla discussão sobre o assunto, de modo a identificar os potenciais e as oportunidades que se apresentam para reorientar os fluxos financeiros internacionais para apoio a atividades de baixas emissões, em cumprimento ao que determina o Acordo de Paris. Sabemos que essa discussão ainda é incipiente, estamos mirando o futuro. Se quisermos criar uma nova economia que reduza drasticamente as emissões globais até meados do século, precisamos envolver de modo decisivo o sistema financeiro. O exemplo mais imediato é o dos títulos verdes, cuja demanda tende a aumentar e que nos cabe incentivar e criar as condições para que estejam conectados aos critérios de integridade ambiental estabelecidos no âmbito dos acordos multilaterais ambientais. Mudança do clima e os objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentável apresentam oportunidades concretas de negócio. Não podem ser encarados como externalidades ou como camisas de força da responsabilidade corporativa. Do ponto de vista político, já emitimos a sinalização necessária sobre o caminho que queremos e devemos trilhar. com nossa rápida ratificação do Acordo de Paris e a sua entrada em vigor em menos de um ano, evidencia-se o compromisso global com o enfrentamento da mudança do clima. Contamos com o engajamento e a contribuição de todos para criarmos os modelos de negócio que assegurem o fiel cumprimento das decisões de Paris. Muito obrigado.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister Sarney Filho. So let's start our discussion. And I'm starting with some provocations. So, well, we know that the last scenarios of the scientific community have been dire. The reports are not very good. Every year now is the hottest ever. If every one of the INDCs that was announced last year were to be religiously implemented, come 2030, we will still have 15 giga surplus of emissions, 1.5 China surplus. And finally, this last surprise, Donald Trump has been elected president of the United States. Nevertheless, as we say in Brazil, a esperança é a última que morre. Hope is the last to die. We think that 2 degree towards 1.5 degree pathway is still possible, but that will only happen if the world economy is aligned in some way with this possibility, if there is a trend. And the one thing certain, especially given the results of the election in the United States, that we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but what we know that the regulation through here, the UNFCCC, will become more difficult. This is certain. And the importance of transforming decarbonization into the economic trend of nowadays will be especially important. So even if we were to receive the news tomorrow that the discussion about the $100 billion that a year from 2020 on has been solved, this would be peanuts compared to what is really needed, because what is really needed is at least $3 trillion every year. So today the governments don't have these resources. All the governments are in debt. All the governments have a deficit. So we can't imagine that it will be made in the way the Marshall Plan was made after the Second World War to rebuild Europe. So where's the cash of the world? Cash of the world is in the financial system. You have like maybe $220 trillion in the speculative sphere. That doesn't go very much so in the direction of any productive investment. And there has been even a word that has been pronounced even by a very conservative magazine like Time magazine about several months ago, financialization. This is the name of the game in international economy. So what we need is a deep economic and cultural shift, which recognizes that climate change is the biggest problem humanity faces at this time, especially because it makes worse all the other problems. So that has to have a reflex in economics. So I like to give the example of a new thing that happened in world economics when world economics were about barter. Suddenly, people came to the conclusion that tiny pieces of absolutely useless metal at that time, it was gold, had the value. And the gold represented different merchandises. And centuries and centuries later, paper substituted. So what we need is a new paradigm in economics given by the recognition of social and economic value of carbon reduction. So carbon minus equals cash. So, and this starts to happen when, from one hand, Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, and in the other hand, paragraph 108 of the Paris Decision. That was a Brazilian proposal that recognizes the economic and social and economic and environmental, of course, value of mitigation actions. So now what we have to see is how that can fit into a context of different mechanisms. And I'll very quickly discuss each one of the economic mechanisms that we have at this time. First of all, and the most traditional and most well-known, carbon markets. I think it's the concept of a low-hanging fruit. It is a trade under the cap. So it's not a revolutionary thing. And there have been problems like double count and so on. It's not our focus. I just say I think it's a valid but quite limited mechanism. Then we have what I would call the real pricing, which is to price directly a ton of carbon for taxation purposes. I think this is very important, especially because it permits to have in the true price of products and services, incorporating externalities. But this is something that will have to be figured out country by country, because the taxation systems and the subsidy systems are national. So each country will have to figure out for its own. There cannot be an international decision on low carbon tax reform. So, and then we have positive pricing, which I think Urcad and Vincent will get into more technical aspects of this. But the idea basically is that carbon reduction, carbon removal equals value. Governments, they don't have to invest the trillions that are needed, but they have to offer guarantees for carbon reduction certificates. There will have to be politically a sort of carbon club of governments, central and development banks and multilateral institutions that will support the value of these certificates. And on the short run, and especially addressing to my European friends, one has to have the idea that there has to be a mitigation targeted quantitative easing. The European Central Bank is throwing money like that on the economy, had to be focused on carbon development. So this concept can be a tipping point for massive investments by the financial sector, which are currently inhibited by the idea the financial sector has that low carbon investment has a too big upfront cost. So I will very quickly give some of the problems that we'll have to address. At this time, there's no single institution capable of implementing this, but we have a fragmented myriad of different actors that have to, in some way, at some moment, come together in order to make this possible. The power brokers and the media, they see positive pricing and so, as with interest. have a lot of discussion, a lot of people very interested. Ah, gee, how interesting. But in some way, they are afraid that, oh my God, this is too good to be true. So there has to be some problem. We have to see. And finally, it's important to say, first of all, that there's no clash between positive pricing and real pricing. They're complementary. They address different kinds of problems. With the question of green bonds, I can imagine forms of integration between carbon reduction certificates and green bonds. But we know there's a hell of a lot of technical issues to be addressed, and there's no single instance today that is formatted exactly to address this issue. So this will have to be figured out. So I leave you with some good questions. And I especially to Vincent and other people that have been technically studying this. What is the nature of the agreement and institutions that would manage carbon reduction certificates? How they would be originally allocated? How will originally their price be established? Would it be fixed, with floating? The same for all kinds of mitigation actions or differentiated by sectors. And finally, how to deal with a certain opposition we feel, especially with central banks, Treasury and the Ministries of Finance. Oh, that adds to the deficit, which it doesn't, but we can have this in the debate. Okay, what can be done immediately? I think that we have to, a huge guarantees, a AAA guarantees fund has to be created. Central banks that actually do quantitative easing have to start doing this with a low carbon purpose. At least part of this has to go. And we have to think of ways of rewarding early and additional action, which is, I think, a step that could be quickly given. So, my friends, thank you very much. That's it. And immediately I will ask Leo Heilemann from CUNEP to address this.
Minuto só, se quis. Eu vou ter que me retirar, mas gostaria de dizer que aqui estão inúmeros delegados, os mais relevantes da nossa delegação. O embaixador Zé Antônio Marconde de Carvalho vai ficar aqui, é a segunda pessoa, é quem coordena todas as negociações, registrar a presença do senador Fernando Bezerra, presidente da Comissão Mista do Congresso Nacional, do deputado Evandro Gussi, líder do Partido Verde, um deputado que muito nos apoiou na aprovação, na ratificação do Acordo de Paris na Câmara, foi quem liderou esse processo, e dizer a vocês que o meu posicionamento, o posicionamento do nosso governo, ele já está claro, no meu discurso ficou claro esse posicionamento, e agora politicamente apoiamos as decisões, a precificação, e agora cabe aos técnicos encontrarem esse caminho. Então, peço licença, agradeço e desejo bom trabalho a todos vocês.
Ok, Leo?
Muito obrigado também ao governo do Brasil por esta invitação. Desafortunadamente, Leo, o meu chefe não está aqui, mas eu sou Gustavo, não sou economista, Leo tinha que estar aqui. Eu acho que um economista é melhor para falar destes temas que um advogado, mas vamos tentar. Eu tenho uma apresentação, não sei se poderiam apresentar nos slides. Could we ask the IT people?
Please again, it's jammed again.
And what I would like to introduce right now is basically some methodological thinking that we at UN Environment have been doing over the last year in terms of how do we channel this money that is already available in the global financial system for the right purpose. We think that within the climate change negotiations, there's been a lot of fuss about this topic, private finance, financial investments, how to deploy that. But we think that there needs to be a little bit of nuance and maybe detail if we want to be convincing and if we want to deploy this amount of funding, which is happening, as you were saying before, Mr. Sirkis, but it doesn't go in the right direction.
Is this
Obrigado.
your presentation? Okay, so tell me next and I'll put next. Okay.
Obrigado. So it has already been said, without transforming the private sector, we cannot implement the Paris Agreement. The private sector is the engine of the economy, and the private sector is responsive of much of the emissions that are happening, that are causing climate change. So what we need to do is reallocating this global amount of sources of finance, private capital, at a grand and unprecedented scale. You mentioned about a new global Marshall Plan. So, but this issue, this discussion is not about prioritizing private over public finance at this point. The discussion is basically how can we make use, the smartest use of public finance so as to unleash the finance of the private sector, of private investment available already. Próxima, por favor. So in the climate negotiations, we've seen a lot of discussions about financial instruments. We have seen, the role that the GCF should play. 10 billion, what is 10 billion in the context of the 3 trillion that you were mentioning before? Nothing, it's not gonna change anything. But what we need to understand a little bit is how can we use and what arguments should we be using in order to convince these private investors to go into the right direction. And there is also the challenge that in the discussions that we've been hearing, there's an understanding or a belief that a lot of this private climate finance is exclusively from developed countries, when there is a lot of money also, private sector, private capital from developing countries that can also be channeled in the right direction. Próxima. Next. Thank you. So if you could click, because there are a number of...
well, maybe you can, I don't know if it works for you.
See. So what we see today is that we've been focusing mostly on the how, which are basically all these instruments that you see there, all these policy incentives that can be used within the context of private finance, but we don't dwell enough on the for what. Why do we need these instruments specifically? And what we need at this point is basically defining for what we need these investments at the national level within the context of specific NDCs. Is it for small scale off-grid renewable energy? Is it for large scale on-grid renewable energy? Is it for supply side energy efficiency, demand side, etc.? Because once we know that, and once we know where this money is gonna be deployed, are we talking about low income economies? Are we talking about economies like Brazil, which is basically growing and it has nothing to do with a country, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa? Once we understand these two things, we are better kind of prepared in order to mobilize this amount of funding. So from what and where is where we need to know and where we need to specify. And then we need to know what financial instruments can be used. And there are many of them, and this is only a list of a few of them, be it project finance, bonds, listed equity, private equity, etc. And then we need to understand what are the barriers within a country that don't allow us to deploy those technologies. For instance, other technology or market risks. Are we talking about country risk at the political level? Are we talking about a lack of preparation, lack of legislation, lack of readiness altogether in the countries? And then once we understand that, then we will be able to know what type of public instruments can be designed in order to call for that private capital to flow into the countries and the economies. So this is basically summarized in a publication we released recently, which helps you to understand this logic, this methodology, the what for, the what, the barriers, and how you do it at the practical level, instead of thinking about the how as the first step. And we have tested that in at three levels within 3 climate change projects: large-scale on-grid renewable energies, for which Brazil actually is probably, I would say, the leader in Latin America with your large deployment of renewable energy. I mean, since end of 2013, I think all your public tenders have been earned by renewable energy, wind, solar. I mean, this is basically showing us that, you know, the right incentives are in place, grid parity, you know, the technology is ready to compete. But we also looked at energy efficiency that many say has a lot of blockages and barriers. How do you do it in energy efficiency? And then this is not so much mitigation, but how do you climate-proof existing infrastructure, such as roads, dams, etc. And what we want to achieve is basically, for instance, this is a case study. If you want to deploy on-grid renewable energy at a large scale, such as you know, wind farms, etc., then the what would be what kind of instruments you could use, such as financial instruments such as project loans, project bonds, private equity, sponsor equity, etc., within the context, the specific context of a country, whether, you know, you have an uneven playing field because you have subsidies to fossil fuels, or your local currency, you have a local currency financing, your banks don't have enough liquidity, or whether you have investment environment risks that might preclude the investments to happen, right? So the how would be the private finance products that you would design in order to bridge the gap under each of those barriers. This is another example for energy efficiency. I'm not going to dwell into that. So the bottom line is that this methodology is ready for implementation within the context of each country's INDC. And this needs to be combined within the landscape of the national financial landscape, which is available in every country. And this would enable the development of financial roadmaps, mirroring technology roadmaps like technology needs assessments that would lead to comprehensive NDC finance strategies for every country that would involve both public and finance actors. And it would allow you to put in place the mix of regulatory instruments at the availability of governments that would make these capital flows to come into your economy. So to give an example, we could take the NDC of country X, which would include a number of projects or technologies that would need to be deployed, such as energy efficiency, demand or supply side, energy efficient, renewable energy, etc. And within that, you would need to analyze what are the financial sources that are available already to the country, in the country, be it public national budgets, but also international development finance, which may be available to in the context of an economy, but also domestic and international capitals. And you have here a list of those, right? So what we would do is basically quantify the amount of money that is needed for each of those technologies. And once you have quantified that, you can think of the public intervention instruments, which are according to the amount of finance that you have at the public level, public budgets and development finance, but also you would mix it with domestic and international finance. So this is an interesting way of doing things at the country level, and which may be, you know, one piece of information that may be helpful once countries are thinking how to unleash these investments. Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I again call for the technical assistance, and I would like to call Sean Kidney from Climate's Bond Initiative. Let's see.
Because I don't have a mic down there, I'll have to stand. My apologies.
Well,
you
look better over there.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a beautiful Brazilian compliment. I'm Sean Kidney, we run an international organisation, Climate Bonds Initiative, and we are working with many parties in Brazil about how to go a green bond market, a domestic market and a market that attracts international investors. One of our partners, of course, is CIRED, who has been instrumental in bringing together some of the initiatives in Brazil around this issue recently. Let me say three things. The challenge is enormous, as the Minister said earlier. That was a wonderful call to arms by the Minister. We're discussing in COP this week implementation of a 2-degree maximum warming and a 1.5 degree ambition. Let's understand what 1.5 degrees means. That is 0 carbon from now. There is no transition with 1.5. That is 0 carbon. Every coal plant closes down tomorrow. Or if it doesn't close down, we have to find sequestration to make up for the fact that it hasn't closed down in a short period. That is the nature of the ambition. Let's hope we can at least keep the 2 degrees, which is looking tough. And our future for our children is not very good at the moment. 2, much of what we have to do can be constructed to be investable. The pipeline of what we have to do globally, if I use the global figures, just for infrastructure, according to the new climate economy, we need to invest anyway in the next few years, 15 years, $94 trillion in infrastructure in emerging markets and rich countries. 65% is in Brazil, India, China, and Indonesia. The US economy, GDP, is 17 trillion, to give you a sense of scale. The global current asset valuation of infrastructure is 50 trillion. That is, we are about to invest double the current valuation of infrastructure globally. This is incredible. This is a building boom like nothing on earth. A few tainted Brazilian building companies should be able to make a comeback on the back of this. But we have to make it green. Because if we don't make it green, our future is even grimmer than it is now. Can you imagine? It's already pretty grim. We need to make sure that when we talk infrastructure, we do not talk freeways. We talk railways. Sao Paulo, stop with the freeways, please. Build more subways. Go like Shanghai. Shanghai already has the biggest subway system in the world, is opening 3 more subways next year alone. Oh God, what would we do for 3 more subways in Sao Paulo next year? And the same in Rio, and the same in Belo Horizonte. When we talk water, we need to make sure we are doing water infrastructure for the world we are entering. Low carbon, climate resilient. Sao Paulo again. Do I hear the words of Sao Paulo ringing in my ears? Climate resilient water infrastructure. When we convert our energy systems to green, Brazil's is already green. BNDES has at least announced no more coal. But we need to make sure that we make everything green going forward to reap the harvest of low carbon solar and so on. So I just say to you, we are going to anyway enter an unprecedented boom in infrastructure investing globally. The world has never seen anything like this. That's because we are moving to cities everywhere and we are going a bit richer. We must make it green. We can make it green. I'll tell you why. One is we know the technology. This isn't hard. We've already won some battles. Solar and wind in Brazil are cheap. We don't need to compete anymore with coal. We can say no more coal. We can probably start saying, frankly, no more gas if we are brave. 2, we have the capital. At this moment in history, we have more capital available on the planet than ever before in the history of humanity. There has never been a moment like this. And what's more, large chunks of it, some 20% of capital, is invested in negative interest rate bonds. How can we pay our pension with negative interest rate bonds? German bonds, Swiss bonds, EIB, Japanese bonds. This is lunacy. This is crazy. This money has to find yield. It is required by legislation to find yield because it must pay your pension and my pension in 20 years or 30 years or however long it's going to take you to retire. So that's That's the opportunity before us. Massive pools of capital around the world seeking product. Now, there are some problems. They aren't very good at risk. Most of what we have to do is high risk. Who's ever built solar on the scale we're about to build it? Ever? Who's ever built green buildings, green cities, mass transit, water infrastructure on the scale we're about to build? It's never happened. There is no credit history. We are not going to get a credit history to get interest rates down to the rates we need to make it all financially viable. So there's going to have to be bridging. Every development bank in the world has to become a bridging institution to bring in private capital. Please, World Bank and IFC, stop with the full 100% lending. Only do 5% or 20% lending and crowd in the pension funds and the insurance funds that are scared of risk. But if the World Bank steps in, they'll say, okay, I'll follow you behind you. That's how it works. And then there's a bunch of instruments. Remember, infrastructure we've been doing for 150 years in Brazil. We know how to finance infrastructure. We know what the toolkit is, the guarantees, the zoning rules, the floor pricing. We know what it is. We just haven't been thinking green. We just have to think green on everything from now on to make this transition. We've started. In Brazil, there's been an investor statement calling for green and green finance, signed by Sul America Investimentos, Santander Asset Management, Itaú, and so on, that CBDS helped organize. We have domestic investors. This is not just international investors. This is domestic investors, as we do in India, as we do in Nigeria, as we do in China. This is not a rich country concern when it comes to investors. They all know that on current trajectories, their portfolios are going to be decimated in 2050. They won't be able to pay the pensions of the young on current trajectories. Something must be done, they say. At least, they say, give us green things we can invest in, because there aren't enough. So, the agenda, to finish up. 1, we need more signalling. We do need the public sector to signal. We need more speeches like the minister's speech today. The G20, led by the Chinese Central Bank and the UK Central Bank, has put out statements about the importance of green finance and green bonds. That is signalling. We need more of that. The Indian securities regulator has put out guidelines for green bonds. That is signalling. The Nigerian president announced in the UN recently they are going to do a sovereign green bond and have a green finance strategy in Nigeria, a petro-state. That is signalling. The world is shifting now to green economic plans, which is, of course, what Brazil needs. The second thing, we will need incentives. Some of those are regulatory, cheap. Some, like the French Banking Association's call for risk weighting differentials in the capital ratio requirements of banks. Hey, that's a technical term, don't worry. What it means is banks get more leverage on green bonds. They have an incentive, a money incentive. We all know what drives bankers, right? A money incentive to lend more to green. This is how we shift our financial system to green quickly. And finally, guarantees by development banks. The rich will do this. America, maybe not America. Okay. Let me stop there. Europe, Japan, China. China will provide guarantee mechanisms to buy down the cost of capital for green if we bring deal flow. Deal flow, that's what we actually need. What we need is ambition in this transition. We have it already in some places. India with its massive solar, transport and water ambitions. China with its decision to shift its whole economy to green. It's green infrastructure planning. It's green finance planning. We need that. We need that in Brazil. We need that in Brazil as part of a new economic narrative. We need a new story, a story of green economic development. In Brazil, it'll probably be green agriculture. Brazil has the governance, the systems now to show the world how to invest capital in infrastructure to feed the planet at a time when food is going to become critical, when food prices are going to go like that because of climate change volatility. Brazil can relaunch itself as a green economy and sustainable agriculture leader for the planet. It can bring other emerging countries along to explain how governance works, to show them how to track what is good and what is bad. It needs to be a leader. We in the North need Brazil to be a leader on this issue. In 2017, at the next COP, I'm calling for you to help us with something. The national development plans, the climate change plans for all countries are abstract, are difficult. We need to convert them into green investment plans. We need to convert them into capital raising plans that will bring investors to the table. If we can bring next year capital raising plans from Brazil, from Mexico, from China, from India to the table, I can tell you one thing. The $60 trillion of investors who signed the UN Climate Summit 2 years ago and promised Ban Ki-moon they would invest in green if green product was available will be there to talk. And that will be international and it will be domestic as well. That's what we have to do. Convert this abstract planning, these great initial achievements of the last COP into something concrete that the bankers can work with, that our companies in Brazil can work with, that international investors can work with. That's the challenge for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, for this remarkable speech. Now you understand why we put you over there. And I will ask Maria Mandelucci, WBCDS Director, to address us.
Thank you. Thank you. I might have to stand as well.
There's a problem with it.
How do you do this? Hello?
Oh.
Okay. So, well, thank you. It's a bit difficult to talk after him and so I will try. Yes, I could go there, but I'm a bit short. I look young. I'm not as young as I look, maybe. But I work in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. This is an organization that has 200 companies that are working on progressing sustainability in many fronts. And I love the previous speech, but I have to say that we had a dialogue between investors and the companies that were working on solutions in June, last June. And, you know, there's this different speech, no? So because the trillions are available, but then the companies that want those trillions cannot have access to those. So then we discussed a little bit further on that meeting, why is that gap existing? No? Because the project developers are saying we do have good projects. The others are saying we have the trillions. So, okay, so why is it not working? No? And one of the conclusions, which is not, the only reason, but it was that those investors were used to investing on assets that are more traditional and didn't understand very well the complexity, that is not as complex, of some of the new investments in clean energy. So they had for many, many years invested in fossil fuel plants. They have developed a strong relationship with the companies that own those plants, and they understood how to factor those into their Excel sheets. But when it came to biofuels, when it came to renewable energy, they had more difficulties on understanding, and they saw more risk than the ones that the players think they exist. So I think that was a good wake-up call. But I'm not here to talk about that. What I'm here to talk about is to present the work that business is doing, global business is doing, to continue with the optimism that was generated by the ratification of 105 countries when they ratified the Paris Agreement. You saw that last year there was a lot of business engagement in the process, and that has gone parallel. And we need to find ways where we bridge those, because I think then we could maximize the impact. WBCSD, with Marina and with other regional partners, worked during last year in an initiative that is called the Low Carbon Technology Partnership Initiative, which is the main outcomes are summarized in this part. We have engaged with more than 165 companies in 8 areas: renewables, fuels, freight, climate smart agriculture, forest, cement, chemicals, and buildings. There is a lot of enthusiasm in the companies that are engaged, that there are many solutions that are available. And if there is one, and by the way, if you walk straight on the Atlantic Room, there are many of those companies are presented those solutions on the Low Emission Solution Conference. We had around 100 speakers that are talking about solutions, really interesting technical discussions. And I asked them, what would make those solutions materialize into real applications? And the first thing everybody said is we need to price externalities. We need to introduce a carbon pricing. Can be direct, can be indirect, but we need to put that signal there. The second thing, we need to remove the fossil fuel subsidies, which is like a negative carbon pricing. Third, well, maybe that was the first one, but anyway, long-term signals. Please don't change regulations every 4 years when the government changes. Please stick to what you have agreed, because that provides the signal that business needs to deploy projects that might live for 15, 20, 30 years. So those are three very important messages. And when I was in Brazil, 5 years ago with Marina in an event, and I remember we were talking about carbon pricing. And so I'm surprised that not much has happened on carbon pricing since, and there was a big ask for carbon pricing. Also from the international business leaders, lately I don't hear anyone saying that they don't want a carbon pricing from the companies. Probably it's that I'm not talking to all of them, obviously. There might be some that don't want it, but in general, companies want carbon pricing because they want that the low carbon solutions that they deploy have that benefit, that additional revenue that comes. So it's fundamental that Brazil accelerates its plans to implement carbon pricing. And I will say that sometimes we hear a lot about carbon leakages, competitiveness, and those issues, okay, which are very important, yes. But my question and my challenge is, do you want to lead in the linkages of carbon markets, or do you want to follow? Because if you want to lead, you better hurry up, because next, in an hour, we're going to have people talking how we are linking the Quebec carbon market with California, and China is working on it. So this is also a race. There is a race for competitiveness, for new technologies, but also there's a race of shaping the regulations of the future. And in that sense, I believe that Brazil, with, given that nature is part of the ethos of your society, given that you have such a green industry and economy, you're in a great position. So, but I think Marina will talk more about those details. So let me conclude with some thoughts, which summarize what I have said. So when we come here to COP as business, we want to convey a sense of optimism, a sense that solutions exist, but a sense that we also need strong regulations. So I repeat again, stick to what you have said in terms of the Paris Agreement. Second, discuss much more with the private sector and other stakeholders that are going to implement those solutions, and in the development of new regulations, because at the end of the day, it is business, it is civil society that are going to implement those. Third, please use those discussions to think about how you can upgrade your NDCs, because we know that the NDCs are still not at the level that is required. Fourth, talk about what this means for people, because we are experts on the field, but we need to bridge the gap and talk to those that don't understand the complexity of the issues that we are dealing. And I think this we have seen in the US, we have seen it with the Brexit. This is a wake-up call that we need to talk the language of the people. And the language of the people maybe is more close to SDGs, quality of life, resilience, growth, and jobs. And I'm sure that the politicians in the room understand this very well. And finally, explain the success stories. Use this platform like we are using the Atlantic Room there to explain that the real solutions that we have hope that this is not the situation is not as bad as it looks. Let's not speculate. Let's just work on the positive and then learn from what has not gone right and incorporate those lessons in new policy making. But I think there is a lot of things that we need to be optimistic about. And that's the message I want to send today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And now we have Marina.
So the woman is in this side. of
Marina
the-
Grossi, the president of the CEBDS, which is our business council for sustainability.
Thank you, Sirkis. Thank you, Everton, Fernando. The Minister of Environment.
Please, I call again the technical assistance here because we're having some trouble with,
Well, at some point, maybe someone, I just have one slide for.
She's coming, she's coming.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you, the Minister of Environment, that just start this meeting here, Everton, Fernando, and others. If COP21 was the COP of the business sector, made a huge difference. I think that COP is a COP of collaboration and partnership, and I'm so glad to have an event in partnership with the government of Brazil. Especially because we are launching a publication that we did in Brazil about Maria was very provocative. I'm going to try to answer her and tell her what we did since her last visit in Brazil. Well, carbon pricing, when we started that work before the COP21 a year ago, there was a huge difference, I think, from now. It was not very clear, maybe because the financial sector wasn't as engaged as it is now. And even from the companies, but also especially from the government, I didn't see a lot of awareness about this. But there is, since then, the World Bank, Brazil is part of the World Bank Partnership for Market Readiness, and we are having a seat there to discuss how carbon price, and I completely agree with Maria, carbon price is so an advantage for Brazil. We are more clean than the other companies, and carbon price gives to more credibility, more a reasonable price, because today it varies from a very low amount to a very huge amount. I think $1 to up to 380 something. So this difference gives uncertainty to the market, and we are engaged in this process. And we, in partnership with the Carbon Disclosure Project, we launched before one brochure, and now we are doing the other one that calls it carbon pricing, what the business sector needs to know to position itself. So what do we want from this is to give tools for the private sector to really see his position and make it clear. That's something that we are launching now, and we are working with a lot of companies that we have. And companies is worldwide very involved in this process. Over 500 companies have adopted internal price for carbon, and over 700 is planning to do so in 2 years from now. So in Brazil, what Brazil did was very, it's outlines from the rest of the world, because we increased 74% between 2015 and 2060. So it was the largest growth rate in the whole world for adopting the carbon internal price. So companies are answered this very quickly. And I think we starting from zero, and we now enhance a lot the knowledge of this, and that's why we are launching now the second brochure that goes deeper in this subject. There is also 40 countries and 4 subnational jurisdictions that, according to the World Bank, is also adopting the carbon price. So it's a reality that's going on. I think it's gives for credibility, you manage risks in your business. So and I think in this situation, it's much more, in this context that we are living, I think will be improving even more. And Maria was saying, and we are very proud to be part of the global network on BCSD, because it was one of the formal institutions that work together since the Lima plan of action to Paris, invited with among with Sustainable Development Solutions Network. They also make a joint effort right here in front of us to see how business can really be more engaged in this process. So Maria is an expert in climate change, and her team and all the team of WBCSD, and of course we are council. So the companies work together in this process, and the work is in Brazil. We also made this collaboration is to increase the benchmark, and that's very important because we create tools and we answer for the business, especially in forest. We have Fibra, we have a lot of companies in Brazil. Forest is, of course, we are cleaner, we are more cheap than other countries to do the mitigation process. We pretty sure going to come from the deforestation to a restoration economy soon, and we are working this process to raise this benchmark, but also work in financial area, because in Brazil, as Sirkis was saying and others, financing is a huge problem, and we are here facing a high interest when the whole world is not facing this. So, and Chan was saying also this, and so we didn't wait for a regulation. We launched together with the Association of Banks called FEBRABAN in Brazil, a guide about climate, about green bonds, because we are sure that as soon as the bonds becomes to be issued, that will be Brazil will be a great candidate. So we launched this guide because we have now 2 companies that launched this, but in the European market. And I think that's just, you know, a matter of time that Brazil will be really engaged on this. So I also invite you to see this huge effort that counts with a lot of experts. Professor Ronaldo Ciro is here with a lot of support from Lilia from CIRED to capture all the stakeholders' contributions on this process, because it's not equal in each country. We have to develop our, you know, our culture and not start from, you know, beginning something completely new. You have to take from what we have. I think such mechanisms such as green bonds will help us, because it's so much clear and easy to increase a lot, because it's really a reputation context. The companies that committed with the green bonds, they want to make more clear what they are doing in green and what they're doing, environmental aspects, what their benefits are, and social, and that's and the investors wants to invest in this kind of projects. So Brazil is a huge candidate for. We have good projects. We are a huge candidate for this, and we're also talking with BNDES to see the barriers, as Sirkis was saying. So how can we use BNDES, the developing bank in Brazil, to guarantee the operations that companies are doing in a different current money. So those are financing is a huge problem, but I think it's a very good situation that we are right now. And also Sirkis in his new position in the forum that puts together all the companies, but also NGOs and society. I think that's a special moment to make the implementation and go forward. So I thank you, and I'm here for any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Vincent from France Stratégie.
Thank you. So I'm Vincent Sius, director of the economic department in France Stratégie, which is basically the public think tank advising the French government on challenges for the country and the global economy. We are part of the Prime Minister administration, but what I would say now is only reflecting the views of my organization, not necessarily of my government, as you would probably understand. First of all, I think we've heard that what we need, and Sean put it very, very dramatically, we need to change our carbon emissions, to reduce our carbon emissions dramatically now if we want to remain below the 2 degrees objective and hopefully closer to the 1.5 objective. We have to change for that our production and consumption patterns in a very rapid way. At the same time, setting a carbon price, a tax through a tax, for example, would hurt consumption and production patterns. And this is why it is very difficult for government to immediately raise the price of carbon. We all know that. Then what we are faced is with the impossibility to raise quickly the carbon price, and at the same time, government don't have basically the cash to subsidize the change in production and consumption pattern now. So we're faced with a situation where we know we need to change our production patterns, but we don't have yet the tools to incentivize companies, private investment, to really undertake this investment to change the way they produce goods and services. So we've seen that we have a range of different instruments, financial instruments, subsidies, green bonds, for example, which are all very sort of useful. I would focus my presentation today on what we call the carbon certificates. We published a paper on this in 2015, and we believe in the merits of these instruments. What do we need? We need a price trajectory for companies, as we've heard from Marina, to basically take their investment decisions, knowing what will be the future price of carbon. But we need credibility of that trajectory, and that's a key point. For instance, in France, we put recently in the law a price trajectory of carbon, which is already a very good thing, which would already give some sort of visibility for investors. But at the same time, private companies can always think, well, who knows what the next government's going to do with this law? It might repeal that law. I might have taken decisions that will commit myself for decades on the basis of that price trajectory, but nobody can guarantee me that that price trajectory is going to be in effect implemented. So we need a mechanism to provide the certainty that the price trajectory tomorrow will be the one that is announced today. And for that, we believe the carbon certificates have a great potential. What is a carbon certificate first? It's a certificate saying, basically based on the emission reduction. So it's positive carbon pricing in the sense that you would emit a certificate and give a certificate to an investment project based on the emission reduction that are basically alleviated by this project, in comparison to a baseline that needs to be defined, but this is not the most complex thing to do. On what value would this certificate be basically based? This is another important point. We know we have the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, who launched the basically high-level expert group tomorrow to define a carbon price trajectory. This is the, in a way, the attempt to give to the world a trajectory for price, for the value of carbon. But as I said earlier, it can also be a national decision taken by a political assembly. That's the case, for example, in France, the parliament decided, and this is now in the law, that there is a given trajectory. So the trajectory is something we need, but this is not something the most difficult to define. once we have that trajectory, we can emit a certificate saying, if you reduce the carbon emissions through new projects, new investments, I would guarantee you through that certificate that the price in, let's say, 2030, along the years of the trajectory, let's say in 2030, the price of carbon will be, let's say, 100 euros, for example. The certificate would guarantee you that the price would reach that level, and if the price doesn't reach that level by 2030, the government or the body guaranteeing that certificate will have to pay you the difference. So this is a certificate to hedge against carbon price tomorrow being lower than the price trajectory announced by the government. So on the side of the government, this is a way of guaranteeing that tomorrow the carbon price will be the one set in the law, in a way triggering the investments that otherwise under the uncertainty of the price trajectory will not happen. If the government basically act accordingly to what is committed to, there is no need to pay for these certificates. Basically, no need to, the price will be basically what was announced earlier. And so the certificate will not have to be paid. No, basically, public money will have to be disbursed. If there is a difference between the two, then the government or the body granting the bond would have to, the certificate would have to basically disburse that money. In that case, it means there is a strong embedded incentive for the government to basically act accordingly to what he has committed to. In this way, we offer the guarantee for investors that their investment plans based on this price trajectory as beneficial as they would be if the price was indeed as announced. So just maybe to answer some of the questions that Alfredo put to us earlier, which institutions? In this way, this certificate mechanism is very flexible. It can be thought of inside one country, just under national institutions. It can be thought of between a group of countries. So basically, a regional club, for example, we can think of that in the EU, for example, but it can also be done internationally between a group of countries, with basically the guarantee being provided, for example, through a fund. How the price should be defined? Basically, this is the carbon price trajectory defined earlier, that I basically explained how to define earlier, mainly in the law, for example, by National Assembly, or if it's a group of countries, according to an agreement between the countries. Basically, how the certificates would be allocated. It would be on a first come, first serve basis, basically. The investor come with a project and say, well, this project, for example, let's say a cement plant, I would rather go for a non-fuel type of petrol or gas technology. I would choose technology which is more expensive, but I would be basically allocated a number of certificates due to this emission reduction. These certificates will only be emitted and given to the investors once the plant is in order and ready to go, basically. So we would need an institution to check on the ground when the investment has already started the reality of the emission reduction. So in that way, part of the risk is put with the investor that needs to basically master the technology and be sure that his choice of technology will reduce the emissions. This is not for the institution guaranteeing the certificates to take on that risk. And first, maybe the link, last maybe, and then I will stop here. The link with green bonds and quantitative easing. I think you can imagine that these certificates will not stay with the investor. The investor can go back to see his commercial bank, for example, finances. Investors would basically use these bonds, again, to hedge against a carbon price lower than what they basically anticipate. So this is a financial product that has many sort of qualities in a world where we need basically to hedge against adverse evolution in a range of variables, including price of carbon. So to end there, this is a very flexible mechanism. It can be developed nationally, it can be developed internationally. This is a system that can change now the production patterns through new investments. So gradually making our production system compliant with the objective of reducing emissions without hurting already existing plants or existing consumption patterns. So basically, it drives the change without falling into the difficulty of hurting vested interests, hurting existing production and consumption patterns. It has also the quality that it transforms the reality for companies and investors now, basically. It offers the guarantee that the price carbon trajectory is the one that has been announced. So companies, investors can base their decisions on the real price, not on something which is uncertain and weak in a way. And lastly, because it will trigger investments now, when it has the potential to have a macroeconomic impact, basically by triggering the investment that we need and that Sean earlier on was basically dramatically calling for.
Okay, thank you now, Professor Jean-Charles Urquhart.
Well, given time constraints, I will not make my presentation. I will add simply two, three sentences. The first is to say that a lot of things which has been said, you can see it in, you can pick this page. We wrote a collection of papers, including with Alfredo and others, in which you will find a description of the type of things just indeed said. In terms of, the only thing I would like to add is, well, first, Mr. Trump has been elected. There are a lot of skeptics in the world. Okay, so the fact that you underline that the uncertainty not only about the carbon price but also about the price of oil. Okay, you raise a tax of $30 per ton, but in 3 years, the price of oil is full of an implicit tax of €100. So that's for the investors. That's very difficult, including the instability in the currencies. So instability is there. Finance is needed. The social value of carbon is needed. Now, how to convince the skeptics, and perhaps Mr. Trump and others, is that to say we are in a world in which most prominent economists talk about secular stagnation. Because of the gap between the huge amount of savings doesn't going to be invested in infrastructures and in production. If you go the line you just described, I think one of the good response to say to Mr. Trump and others is that you have to do that not only for the climate, but also to pick the world out of the trap of this secular stagnation that we have just in the front of us. So that's only thing that I have to add, and then you can refer to this book. And it is not a book; it's a collection of papers. And find that.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have been asked to void the room for the next session, but so we won't have the opportunity, unfortunately, of having a debate. But at 6:30 p.m. in the same room, this discussion will go on, but in a floor that is being organized by the Germans. So we'll have the opportunity, I'm going to be there, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss these same themes at 6:30 p.m. Thank you very much.
Un plaisir. À bientôt, on reste en contact.